What's happening, everyone? Welcome back or welcome to the Water Ski Podcast. This is Matteo, your host, and the goal of this podcast is to promote water skiing in all its events, the people around the sport, stories about the sport. We just promote water skiing. We like the sport and we want it to be bigger. If you've been following the podcast for the last 2 or 3 months at least, you might know that I hold a PhD in sports psychology. That is the field where I did all my training and my education and the field that I'm passionate about. And it goes without saying that having an opportunity to combine my two big passions, so sports psychology and water skiing, has been a lot of fun, both professionally and through the podcast. So I started this series of episodes called Swerve Psyc or Swerve Psychology, where basically I introduce some of the topics within the field of sports psychology and see how those can be applicable to water skiing. And I've been thinking about doing an episode on flow, which you might have heard differently as being in the zone or being locked in, being on the sweet spot. That's more common in golf. But essentially, that experiential state where everything somewhat feels automatic and easy to execute, and oftentimes is associated with performance, with very good performance, but not necessarily. And so I was trying to plan for an episode ahead, and then I realized that Marcus and I talked about this very topic on his podcast 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. Now, most of you might know that his podcast is called the FlowPoint Podcast, so it seemed appropriate that we would discuss the psychology of flow, so the theory behind it, the dimensions that we use to understand the flow experience, some personal examples, and what skiers can do to make flow experiences more likely to occur. Now, they are few and far between in any performer. Doesn't matter your level of water skiing or any other performance field. Flow states they don't happen very often, but when they do, they really hook you into your activity and make you enjoy it more and make you more motivated to do it more often. So that sounds pretty good. So we decided at the time to just give a bit of education about what flow is and how that could relate to water skiers. So because if you are like me, I prefer to hear conversational podcasts as opposed to one person speaking in front of the mic, I decided to take that episode, obviously with Marcus' permission, and share it with you guys. I think you will enjoy it if you hadn't had a chance to hear it 4 years ago. And if anything, you might learn a little bit more about what flow is. Now, I'll also post the link to the original episode of FlowPoint Podcast in the show notes, as well as another episode Marcus and I recorded where we spoke in more general terms towards the end of that episode about the effect that flow experiences can have on children. And they are good effects. So I hope you'll enjoy both of those original episodes. Go and subscribe to Marcus's podcast, the FlowPoint Podcast. And especially go and check out the FlowPoint method. So if you're not aware, the FlowPoint method is the online water ski training program that Marcus and Jenny developed. They basically tackled water skiing improvement with a very holistic approach, which is, by the way, the approach that most professional sports take, right? So technique, physical, so fitness, nutrition, mindset, strategy, truly holistic approach for those who are committed to take water skiing to the next level. If you are interested in joining, or even just to try the free 3-day trial, I can never say it right, free 3-day trial, you can go on www.thewaterskipodcast.com/FlowPoint method, one word, or you can click in the link in the show notes. So go and check out the podcast, the method, and enjoy this episode. And come back next week for this time for an interview next week. So enjoy.
So continuing the discussion with the FlowPoint professor from last episode, can't remember which one that was, maybe 7 or 5 or 6. Today we're going to be talking about flow and mindfulness, correct?
Yes, yes. By the way, let me preface that I'm not super comfortable with FlowPoint professor, but by now I guess I'll accept it and move on.
It's you, dude. It's you. You're locked in. You can't back out. The only way that you can get out of this is if I fire you, and that's not going to happen. Okay.
Good.
So
okay, good.
So tell us a little bit about the history of flow, or where do you want to start with this? Actually, you know better than I do.
I think the history is interesting, right? So the guy that formalized the concept of flow, his name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he's I know, it takes a degree to learn how to pronunciate him. So he's a clinical psychologist out of Hungary, who basically in the 1970s formalized the concept, right? And what he was interested in understanding was what kind of experiences do people who are involved with something, I guess, engaging, report, right? So we are talking about athletes, musicians, writers, scientists, dancers, anyone who is pursuing a craft, and there are a few times where they experience something that they would define as flow or the sweet spot or being in the zone, all this terminology that we hear all the time. And he started, like we start a lot of times in science, just by asking people, right? So what is it that you experience when you have that? What does it mean when you feel in flow? Like what things are occurring, you know?
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I feel like people use the word flow like they use the word love. Does that make sense?
Go on.
I feel like your buddy just did something cool. Oh, dude, you were in the zone, man. You're feeling the flow. Well, actually, or just like, oh man, I love this dress. That you hear a woman say that, or a guy say, man, I love those wheels, dude. Like,
right.
That's not love, okay? And just like that's not love, there's a lot of things that really aren't flow. But I feel like it's a very like you're getting to that point, but it's a very critical, like unique moment that not everybody feels every day. It's just not something that I very few times have I actually been at that flow point. You know?
Yeah, and that's what Csikszentmihalyi found out when he was interviewing people. Like he was asking them like, oh, how many times have you experienced flow in your life? And especially in the athletic domain, maybe a dozen times in a career, right? On average. So 10, 12 times where they experience true flow moments. So it's a rare thing, you know? But obviously, we see it as different degrees. So it's not either this is a flow experience or it isn't. There are different degrees of flow, right?
Sure.
So what are the characteristics of flow? What is it that flow is made of? And one of the things that we know, and that's probably the one I'll spend the most time on, is the balance between challenge and skill, right? And even to be more specific, the perceived challenge and the perceived skill. So what that means is if you're presented with a challenge that is pretty high, but you know you can achieve, okay, and you have a certain amount of skill, when the two tend to be high, that's when you're very likely to experience flow, okay? So let's do a ski example. Am I allowed? Ski example?
For sure, dude.
Okay.
That's what we're here for. Okay.
So let's say someone who's on average can ski 3 buoys at 32 off, okay?
Yep.
If we have a practice set, because flow can happen, practice, tournament, you know, it's somewhat detached from performance.
Non-discriminatory.
No, exactly. So let's say that we ask to this skier, hey, your goal today is to do 1 at 32 off the dock. Okay, so that's possible. It's not super simple, not super hard, but still challenging, right?
Sure.
Provided the skier thinks he or she has the ability to do it, so skill pretty high, challenge pretty high, then this skier is likely to experience flow.
If they're well matched.
If they're well matched,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You
can answer your mom's call if you need to.
Oh no, this is actually Dane Meckler. You know who he is, but we'll throw the phone away. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, no, if they're both high, that's when you're likely to experience flow. If the challenge is too high, so for this skier we say you try to go out and run 2 at 39. Obviously, that's impossible, right? They perceive that their skill is not up to the challenge is massive, no flow.
Yep.
And the opposite as well. Like if we challenge this skier to go out and to do 2 buoys at 34 miles per hour, 15 off, it's not really that challenging, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have that experience, that well balance of flow, of challenge and skill for flow to happen, right? Now, the tricky bit is, it's your perceived challenge and your perceived skill. So it doesn't really, that perception is based on reality. So if you know that 19 sets out of 20, you go out and you do 3 at 32, you know that on average, your skill is 3 at 32 off. But if you truly believe that your skill is 5 at 32 off, then your perceived skill is 5 at 32 off. Mm-hmm. That's a slightly different, okay? So, yeah, it's the balance of perceived skill and perceived challenge.
So, I have a question.
Go on.
How do we culture and nurture and help athletes, whether it's water skiers or otherwise, develop the correct perception of their own skill set? Because it seems like sometimes athletes don't have the correct perception of what they're capable of, and therefore what their potential is.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Whether it's high or low.
Well,
yeah.
Well, I think this is a very general answer, but feedback, right? Feedback that you receive from the activity itself, which is good that water skiing, particularly slalom and jump, have physical measures or integers measure of performance, right?
Benchmarks, yep.
Right. So the feedback there is self-evident. For someone like a wakeboarder, say, it's a little harder because their ratings are subjective. Mm-hmm. So, they have an idea, of course, but it's tougher for them to get a very prima facie performance feedback, right?
Yep.
But that's when, on top of that, you add your coaches, you add video, any kind of feedback generally gives you an understanding of perceived skill.
Sure.
Now, perceived challenge is more about, it obviously depends on skill, but it also depends on confidence, right?
Yep.
So you can have 2 skiers with average 3 at 32. One will go at their first tournament of the year thinking I'm running 5 at 32, and one will go and say, I hope I ran 22 off, right?
Yeah.
So obviously confidence is part of the picture.
Yeah. Well, and both of those the outcomes can be totally different from what you expect. The guy or the girl who's got the high expectation could end up skiing really well, and the one that's got the low expectation could end up skiing bad, or vice versa. So, it seems like user dependent, based on the athlete. Absolutely. And what they're
Absolutely. That I thoroughly believe that balance is augmented a lot by a good coach, or in a team event by a good team dynamic or good relationship with teammates, right? Yeah. So that's why getting feedback from others really helps.
Yeah.
So
what's the next?
To me, that's the most important one.
Okay.
And then the other ones are mainly good descriptors about what happens when you are in flow, right? So when you are in flow, what you generally tend to experience is that action and awareness become one thing, right? So there's generally, when we do some kind of like motor activity or water skiing or any kind of sport, you go, okay, I plan to do this movement, and then you are aware when you do it at a subsequent time.
Yeah.
In flow, that happens automatically. As you're aware of what you're doing,
Yeah.
and that tends to bring a very what we define as autotelic experience. And you mentioned it last time we talked about, like the impression of you seeing yourself, like out of body experience, right? Like you are there doing this thing, and you don't really have to imagine it or seeing it. It's just like someone is controlling me, and I'm just doing this very easily.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I feel like that is, for me personally, that's one of the main describers of that flow state, that flow point, is that feeling you just described. But I also think it's interesting. Some people attribute that to a higher power, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And have very, very strong feelings that is, you know, a higher being working through them, God or whoever. Other people take it as just that everything was happening, everything came together at that right moment. And I think it's very unique. But what I wanted to get on before I forgot about was, how do you coach people to get to learn to give themselves a chance to have that action and awareness kind of merge, or set themselves up so that they have more opportunities for that moment to happen? How do you coach people? So like you said, if I used to coach people and say, okay, when you pull out for the gate, I want you to do X, Y, Z. Now, and for the last, 10 years, I've been trying to get people to visualize, theorize, meditate on an idea off the water, in hopes that when they go on the water and they're just simply trying to ski and react and become more aware, that thinking will filter into what they're doing actually on the water. So they're not really cognitively trying to do a pose or a move like you would in yoga class, where you're mechanically moving, but you're trying to let the cognitive, theory filter its way into that action awareness piece. I don't know if that makes sense.
Makes really good sense, and that's exactly what I wanted to mention. We don't know much about the action awareness dimension of flow, even less something that could cause it. But I think it's a good way to approach it, where you try to do the thinking beforehand, right? We said last time that could help avoiding reinvestment on the water. But yeah, I think the awareness part would improve, right? So let's say that you go with that. You're trying to have your skier improve something about the gait or the edge change or something about skiing, right? And so you explain a lot off water. Show video, visualize, make the skier understand the physics of it and whatnot. And then the skier just goes out and skis, right? And then awareness may be increased by you just giving feedback about what you saw, and having some kind of like a dialogue with the skier as far as I felt this, okay, to me you looked like that, and it ends there.
Yeah.
There's no now you should be doing this.
There's no
right?
Okay, now go ahead and do. There's just the coach helping the skier relate what the skier felt to what actually was happening, so that they can develop an understanding of what the feeling means. Yeah.
And leave it at that.
Yep.
Then off the water, probably say, okay, you see, try to change this, or you should be trying to feel that or whatnot. But I think maybe increasing awareness, which, think about it, like it's so hard in skiing, it's such a quick sport, right? If we were on the golf course, well, then we can play around and try to change things. But in my opinion, is something like slalom, where yes, you have pauses in between passes, but on average your heart rate is twice what you normally is, so you're not thinking straight to begin with.
Yeah.
Probably it's just better to learn how to be aware of what you're doing, which is tremendously hard.
Yep.
And then the thinking on the dock.
On the dock, yeah.
On a long chair, yeah.
What do you personally do before you ski? Like yesterday, before the pro-am, what do you do to try to trick yourself into getting ready for performance?
I generally like to not set myself aside too early. I think I got to discover that for me that doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So I'm not the kind of skier that isolates himself half an hour before. Mm-hmm. But like maybe like 4 or 5 skiers before me, I start to open my ski bag, look at my gear, put my board shorts on.
Oh crap! My skis broke. No. That's happened to me before. Showing up for, it was actually a practice ride, but you get home, the airline broke your ski, but you didn't know until you open your bag and you're supposed to be skiing next. You're like, great. Yeah. Luggage cart ran over my ski. Appreciate that one.
Yeah, I've had that before. Not fun. Not fun at all. But yeah, so I just, try to imagine how I would like to ski my passes, and by that I mean seeing it and feeling it as well. So I spend like 5 minutes skiing, probably mentally like 10 or 12 passes. Mm-hmm. I generally like to do 38.
That's a good line length.
It's a good line length. It's short, but it's doable. You can still feel in your movements, and then, put my gloves on, go ski.
Yeah. Do you joke around on the dock, or do you just keep it serious and straight faced? Do you hide behind the beard, or do you come out to talk with a few people?
Depends who's on the dock.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Well, I mean, the dock is a very interesting dynamic. We could do a freaking podcast series about dock psychology,
Yeah, we could.
But depends. Generally, the dock starter is a safe bet. They're not super involved, so you can have a chat with them too. But no.
Can you tell me how important are goals with this whole mindfulness and flow approach? Having a clear set of goals.
Very important. One of the things we know is that task goals are a good way to induce flow, and those goals better be clear, better be well defined, right? Mm-hmm. So and on top of this, we know that like some kind of technical non-performance related goal is better for flow. It's also better for performance per se, but I'm talking about something like technical, right? So if you want to induce flow in a slalom skier, rather than going out with a performance goal of some sort of buoy count, go out with a task goal or a technical goal of timing of your edge change of the second wake. Yep. Or not leaving your hips behind. Something, very process-oriented, very task-oriented, that you can also get some clear feedback on, right? Sure. And that's where your coach and your videos come back.
Yep.
So definitely clear goals are a huge part of flow. And related to that is the concentration on the task, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're experiencing flow, that task goal which you determined before is very easy to get concentrated on, right?
Yep.
And that concentration, that's how the 9 dimensions are all connected. That concentration makes time.
Wait, 9 dimensions?
Yeah, we've already covered 5 or 6.
Okay, that's a lot. We live in one, so there's 9 to flow. That's the problem right there.
Yeah, it's I told you last time, it's one of the big mysteries of performance psychology, but we're understanding more and more about it.
So concentration. So is there any merit, do you think, to the technique I've seen throughout the years of trying to set up distractions, deliberate distractions during training to try to train the skier, the athlete, to be better at focusing on or concentrating on the task at hand?
Give me some examples.
Just making the water a little rolly, going out spinning the boat beforehand, or having a dog barking at you while you're but just before you get in the water from the dock.
Right.
Just, I don't know, anything that's going to distract the skier in training? Do you think there's merit to that, or do you think it just limits the productivity of the training itself?
See, I think there are merits to that. As you probably know, a lot of professional football teams train with like blasting sound systems all the time. I think it really depends on what the skier's concentration is most likely to be affected by. I can tell you, at least in my own personal case, but I think a lot of skiers will tell you that the first source of distraction is their own mind, more than the crowd, the dock next to two ball, or the skiers on the dock right before them, right?
Yep.
It's your mind, your thoughts, your emotions, things that you can't really, I mean, you can certainly train, but they're hard to train.
What's the single biggest distraction, or what's a big distraction that you've had to deal with in a tournament setting? Do you remember any?
Like outside of my thoughts
something that just was happening in the environment around you during a tournament set that threw you off.
First time I skied junior masters, the pavilion.
Oh, really?
I could not keep my eyes out of the pavilion. I cannot explain it to you.
Did you have a crush on a girl, or what? Was she sitting in the stands?
No. I was just too enchanted of the fact that I flew to the United States to ski in the biggest event ever, and I saw it on TV in the past, and I could just I remember being on the beach side of Robin Lake. That's where slalom started a few times.
Yeah.
And I was just staring at the pavilion. I could not, for the life of me, think about what I had to do.
Yeah.
That's I don't know why that's coming to mind, but that's certainly one. Yeah.
Well, the Masters is coming up here in less than 2 weeks. How did that tournament ride go for you?
Very badly the first time. Very badly. I ended up swimming to the pavilion that I kept thinking about.
Well, that's fitting right there. That's very fitting. I mean,
right.
You were fixated on it, so you finished there.
Second time went a little better, but that time not really.
Yeah. So what's your best finish at Masters? Junior Masters or Masters? What's your best?
I did second. Third. I did third my last year.
Yep.
I did third my last year.
What did you run? What did you run performance to get third?
Man, I was first in the prelims with 3.5 at 38, and then in the final, all I needed was 5 at 35. Conditions weren't the best.
Yeah.
But I mean, certainly something doable. Exploded 3-ball at 35, and I got third.
Dude.
Yeah.
The offside monster gets you in the big tournaments.
Absolutely.
Gets me too. So what else do we have? What's the next? As far as now, we're working through the 9 dimensions of flow. What low?
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think so. We did challenge and skill balance. If there's one that I would like your listeners to remember, is that one. Mm-hmm. Make sure that you pose challenges to yourself that you perceive your skills are up to.
Yeah.
And that's when you're most likely to experience flow. That counts for Nate. Nate, if you're listening, go out and put a good challenge to yourself. It's not going to apply to anybody else. And it applies to the person who just learned yesterday how to ride one ski.
Yeah.
It's beyond skill level. It just has to apply to the individual. And unambiguous feedback, we talked about it. As you put this goal in front of you, but primarily technical, try to make sure that you get good feedback. Luckily in slalom, you can get, or in any sport by now, you can get video, you can get ways to get unambiguous feedback.
Sure.
And then the transformation of time, I just think is so cool. You have reports of track and field athletes that run the 100-meter dash saying that their less than 10 seconds run lasted 2 hours in their mind, right? And then by the opposite token, you have marathon runners that say that flew by, which to me is mind-boggling. How can that fly by, right?
It's the power of the mind.
It's just the perception of time when you're in flow changes a little bit,
Yeah.
And I think in skiing that could be related as well.
Speaking of that, Is there? Do you think there's any merit to the idea or the theory that transformation of time in the slalom course or hitting the jump ramp or doing a trick run allows athletes somehow to slow things down to where they can execute how they know or how they have trained to execute? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's something to. I don't know that would cause flow, but I think the parallel is there. Like, think of, I mean, water skiing, slalom jump, very quick sport, right? So then makes you think that, like, if you were to experience flow, that would slow down, right? As opposed to be even faster than what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
So I think that tending for that awareness and slowing down, whether it's technical or I think that's something worth pursuing. You'll hear a lot of slalom skiers saying that the pass felt slow, right? Now you can imagine that from a technical standpoint, right? So they have better angles and they're traveling more water, so physically it feels slow, but also the perception of it is slower than how slow it is.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. Interesting. What's the autotelic experience? What's that?
That's what we were talking about before, right? So that experience that you're not really you.
You're out of body.
Your experience, out of body, right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I think one of the cool, like, science is a reflection of human beings, right? And I think one of the cool things when you hear interviews of people that just experience flow is that it's hard for them to explain it, as it is for science hard to explain flow. You probably remember when Jamie Bouchin ran 2:43 at Malibu, at French Malibu. You look at the interview that he gave afterwards, it's a classic example of flow. Like, he tried to explain what happened, and yet nothing sensical came out. You know, he said, "Good driver."
No, that's just Jamie on a normal day.
No. That's a great example of flow. Like, he could not explain it. You know, he said, "Great driving, great ski, water felt good." Like, there wasn't, and he was probed. Like, he was probed to explain what he felt, and I can guarantee you, to this day, he will not be able to, just because it was such a one-time. Because that's the other thing. Like, if you were experiencing flow once a week, eventually you would get the grasp of it and be able to explain it to some degree. But it happens sometimes so unexpectedly that it's hard to make sense of it. I can give you an example of when I experienced flow one time that I had, I can explain to you.
Yeah.
So it was 2007. I won the under 21 Europeans, and I partied for a few days. I mean, understandable, right? And then
wait.
Thursday morning.
Wait, you're under 21 and you're partying. That's not cool, bro.
Well, I'm from Europe, man.
Okay.
Rules are a bit different.
They are.
So I'm partying, and then, Thursday morning, my coach calls me and says, "Hey, you're signed up for a record tournament tomorrow. Do you want to come and get a practice set?" Yeah, fair enough. So I go, and man, like 32, 35, 38, 39, 2:41, 2:41 home. Like, something that I think I ran 39 maybe once in my life before that. And unexplainable. Like, to this day, probably some of the best passes I've ever run in my entire life.
Yeah.
And my coach was eager, like, what are you feeling? Like, because it was one of those sets, like, he was driving, not watching, Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know. It just feels very easy today,
Oh, man.
So
don't you wish you could go back and just watch, have that feeling again and try to figure out, okay, what sparked that, or what caused that, or what led me down that road?
Yeah, but you know what? I think connecting back to what we talked about last time, more than what brought me to ski 2:41 easy was how cool was I that for the next 3 months after that, all I wanted to do when I woke up in the morning was go to the lake and ski.
Yeah. So
that's what I think is cooler,
The concept of flow as it relates to motivating humans to pursue excellence, pursue developing a craft, whatever it is. That's maybe the biggest takeaway of all is flow may be the single most impactful thing to drive passion and desire, I'd say.
Yeah. That's what I think. That's what I think the sports psychology research is finally realizing in the last 5 to 10 years. Because before we were looking at peak performance, which by definition is great performance, and flow. And we thought there was a 1-1 correlation, which would mean they are the same thing. But they're not, right? So you can have peak performances in which you don't experience flow, and you can have flow experiences which are not even performance related. You could go, Marcus, and have a free ride set in 2 hours and flow comes out, right? So it's not really.
Yeah, I know.
For sure.
No, I know.
For sure.
I know. I agree completely. I think
but what we do see is that flow experiences always bring a sense of truly intrinsic motivation. So that makes you want to do the activity more and more, you know?
Yeah. Which, to circle back around, I know we don't have much more time, but to circle back around to our last discussion about youth and kids in sports and trying to find the motivating factors that keep and get kids excited about sports, I think it's less about, hey, I'll buy you a new pair of shoes or I'll buy you whatever, and it's more about setting them up, giving them the right environments with the right friends, you know, the right community to put them in the right environment so that they can have their own experiences approaching flow, because then they're going to be more compelled to get proactive and to get passionate about this thing. If they have the predisposition to want to do that, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it's always the combination of like predisposition and I guess parenting and reinforcement. But I think again, as you want your skier, young kid to enjoy the sport that they're doing first and foremost, because that will keep them in the sport longer. And provided they get passionate about competition, it makes them more likely to continue pursuing their craft, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm gonna butcher, like, make it super easy, but you know, like if a teenager, up until teenager years, all they were reinforced for was performance, the second they go off on their own and they do first pass, miss, first pass, miss, first pass, miss, one of those valleys in performance, when they get back up and they're not reinforced because the parent is not there anymore, the first question that they ask themselves is, what's the point?
Yeah.
But if they were reinforced to enjoy what they're doing, then performance is
not insignificant.
Enjoyment is incidental.
Yeah. I guess that I have one question for you that's kind of along those lines, and that is it more important to develop the skill of you know, pushing yourself to excel at something that you may or may not like, or is it more important to be able to develop this self-awareness skill of the things that you actually enjoy in life, and then going and figuring out how to do those? Because we oftentimes get sucked into things that, as humans, that we don't necessarily always enjoy. But it's just because that's the group of people that we know and we associate with, or, you know, it's what our parents brought us up to do or whatever. But how important is it to pay attention to that spark in your head that does, you know, make you feel that much closer to flow?
Yeah, I think to me, particularly in the youth age, is so important. The second one, the ability to be aware of what you enjoy, which again, a 7-year-old kid has no trouble with that.
Yeah.
They will tell you right away what they enjoy and what they don't enjoy. And then as life goes on, other commitments come up, and that's, you know, it's not morally right or wrong. It's just how things are in society. If you were to continue grow up doing only the things that you enjoy, you would not be a sociable human being, and all the problems that come with that. But when it comes to something that is not, that your life doesn't depend on, like a sport activity, particularly if you're a kid, it'd be nice if you were given the opportunities to explore what it is that you like and what it is that you don't like. Something that I think used to be more for our parents, like they were more exposed to other things. Even though the means were less, they didn't have parents telling them, you do that, right? They were like, hey, there's a football field, there's a baseball diamond, there's a gym, do whatever, a pool, and figure out what you like. It's fun, you know?
Yeah.
My hope is that it comes back there as soon as possible.
I think it will. I think a few more of those Starbucks caffeine tablets, and you're gonna have the keys to all of our problems, buddy.